Going to take a look at La Bataille de Jena. This is the second battle in the package from Marshall Enterprises on La Bataille pour la Prusse, kind of the four battles making up the beginning of the campaign between France and Prussia. This is the historical battle. There are several alternates included in the package, sort of what if, but we're going to look at the historical. Now the map is very large, 4 map sheets. The picture here is only a portion of the map. Up to the left-hand corner there's more space, and off to the right there's more space to the east. But much of that on the east side is not used in this game. That comes into play in the alternate battles, but in this one most of the action takes place right here. For the forces, the French have the bulk of their army present, starting with Napoleon, his typically large staff, portions of the Guard cavalry, though much of it is not present, the Guard infantry, some dismounted dragoons, kind of an interesting feature, and much of the heavy cavalry reserve is present. Now why have the rest of the Guard cavalry? Why have the counters and the artillery if they're not here? Well, they're present in the alternate versions of the game. Now the bulk of the French force is comprised by these 3 or 4 infantry corps, the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. Most of all of those forces are here to fight at Jena. On the Prussian side, we have Hohenlohe's formation, army. It's actually not very large. Though it's 5 divisions, there's really only 2 that are significant, the 2nd and the 3rd. There's also an advanced guard and kind of reserve. The 4th and the 5th are fairly small units. The Prussian army is not that strong, while their sizes are so bad. The firepower and morale is actually very poor. They do have very strong cavalry, and that helps them a lot. Additionally, there is Ruckel's reserve. It's really only 1 division, this 1st division here, then an advanced guard and some cavalry. Taking a look at the basic flow of the battle, you can see the initial positions here. The Prussians are spread out pretty far from the west to the east here, and also far forward defending those advanced positions. The French are, very lightly represented to begin with down here around the Windmill. As the battle opens, the French reinforcements, first elements will arrive on the bottom of the map here, namely the 5th and the 4th Corps. And they'll begin to engage the Prussians in the center and on the right there. Then the 7th Corps will start to arrive, moving on the left. 5th will be pushing pretty hard in the center, and the 4th has to really hit the Prussian left very hard. As the battle develops, the 6th Corps will join the 5th Corps, hitting the center. The 4th Corps will start to turn to the west, while the 7th Corps will continue to push up on that Prussian right flank. As the battle kind of reaches its conclusion, the French will be pushing the Prussians very hard up into the northwest corner of the map. Hopefully they will have broken the army by then. Of course, we play to win the game, and no one wants to be the speed bag in the gym. Everyone wants to be the prize fighter. But the Prussians are completely outclassed in this battle. They're outgunned, they're outmanned, and they're going to take a beating. So how do you make that into a competitive and even fun game? Well, victory conditions, of course. The victory conditions allow the Prussians to fight for something and really kind of force the French to be the ones to win and take victory. The first aspect are victory points awarded for losses. Increment losses inflicted on the enemy yield victory points to both sides. Now the Prussians get 2 victory points for every increment loss inflicted on the French, and the French only get 1. So the French have to be careful about taking too many losses. The second things are these time-limited geographic objectives for the French. There are 4 of them, and they represent sort of the phases of the battle. So by the 10 a.m. turn, the game starts on the 8 a.m. turn, the French must capture all 4 of the villages marked with the X's. So that's 7 turns to enter from the bottom of the map here and march and fight and capture those villages. The next victory objective phase takes place at the 12 p.m. turn. So that's another 7 turns. You see the French have to go a long way and capture 4 or even actually 5 more towns. One is off the map to the east there. But that's a long way for them to go. Third, 1340 is yet again another step forward. This goes to the northwest side of the map, and they have to take 2 more towns, and they're basically crushing the Prussians up into the top left corner of the map. And the final end of game takes the final villages up in the northwest corner. Now additionally, for each of those timed objectives, the French can earn victory points if they're able to push Prussian divisions to a morale level. So as the battle progresses, the French have to have higher morale levels and more of them inflicted on the Prussians. And this is not easy for the French for a couple of reasons. One is that almost the entire French army arrives as reinforcements, and the variable reinforcement mechanism makes that indeterminate when they will arrive. For the most part, they can arrive, the odds are in their favor to arrive on time, but because it's based on a die roll, they can be delayed for quite a bit. And even a small delay will seriously impact the ability of the French to achieve their objectives. And the other aspect is the early morning fog. The first, hour and 20 minutes till 9:20 a.m., the battle is shrouded in fog, and that has a pretty significant effect. It slows movement of infantry and cavalry quite a bit. It reduces ranges and effectiveness of fire, and cavalry cannot conduct any charges. So this is really hard for the French to make those victory locations, just due to the fact that the conditions are going to be very much against them. So looking at the opening setup, here are the Prussians, arrayed in their really thin lines. Some forces push very far forward, and only a very small number of French. Napoleon and his staff and some of the 5th Corps cavalry and artillery are present. But otherwise, there are no other French forces. Take a closer look here around the Vindel. See Napoleon, some of that 5th Corps cavalry, and the light elements of the 4th Corps there in front of them at that first village, Cospita. Off to the east is Clausewitz, and some of the light elements of the 1st Division are present defending that village, as well as some grenadiers of the 5th Division behind them. And that big Hussar regiment is going to be very helpful to the Prussians. Around Lutzeroda in the center of the map, we see another defensive line. They have to hold that village, but they also need to hold the center against a rapid French advance. Now, far off in the east, Leisten is the last objective hex for the first part of the French advance. And we see the grenadiers of the 5th Division. Interestingly, they have this heavy artillery out there on the far left flank. And back towards Krippendorf have the largest division, the 2nd Division, and Hohenlohe himself kind of poised as a reserve in the center there. Now, in the vicinity of Vierstein-Heiligen, we have some scant forces, really sort of a local reserve behind the main area. And then on the very far right flank around Ischerstedt, have some cavalry and light forces of the 3rd Division, as well as the main body of the 3rd Division, which kind of forms a reserve. And finally, on the very far right, two regiments of what's left of Ludwig's 1st Division, Advance Guard, are holding Kochau, and that'll really sort of help to link up with Ruckel when his men arrive. With the conclusion of the 10 a.m. turn, we can check in and see the progress of the battle thus far, see how the French did with their first objective. This is a high-level view of the full map, kind of see how the French have advanced, more or less the way you'd expect. The 7th Corps on the left is making its way through the Schnecke Pass, slowly through all that heavy terrain, but they are going probably a little faster than the Prussians would like. In the center, the 5th Corps has advanced past the objective villages. It's making good progress. The Prussians are maintaining several lines of defense there and are keeping the French kind of in check at this point. And on the far right, the 4th Corps has advanced, not quite as far as they would like. They've done some damage but haven't achieved the objective that we were looking for. So the French have captured 3 of the villages, but they did not manage to get into Leisten there on the far right of the line. So that means the French did not get the victory points for that first objective. Additionally, they did not push any Prussian divisions to a morale level, so no victory points for that. But the losses are kind of interesting to see. The Prussians have lost 65 increments. That gives the French 65 victory points. French have lost 25. That gives the Prussian 50 victory points. So the French are doing okay in terms of the battle and the victory points at this stage. But the main reason they didn't achieve their geographical objectives were, as expected, a couple of reinforcements were delayed by die roll, and the fog slowed that advance on the right quite a bit. I mean, the 4th Corps has a very long way to go from their entry point all the way to Leisten. They have to be very fast, and they just couldn't get past even that slim Prussian defense. Going in for a closer look, here's the 4th Corps on the very far right, and they pushed back a lot of the Prussian grenadiers. They're in a pretty precarious position. The reason they're still holding this little hill is because that heavy artillery can't limber up to escape. So the Prussians are probably going to try to put some cavalry over there to help out their grenadiers and get them retreated. Moving towards the center of the line, this is around the Clausewitz area. The French have gone far past that, pushed back the defenses there. A little bit of cavalry for the Prussians, as well as the 2nd Division occupying the ridgeline there. It's what's keeping the French back at this point. The 6th Corps cavalry with Marshal Ney has arrived, but not the balance of his infantry forces. Around Cospeda, we see the French have cleared that out, and the Guard and Napoleon and his staff are moving up into position. Around the center, the 5th Corps is concentrating. They're probably going to try to stay to the left of that ridge line and go straight up the middle. Around Lutzeroda, part of the French 3rd Division is moving probably into the woods here to try to flank a little bit of that Prussian defensive line. We see basically 2 and 3 lines forming of Prussian defenses there in the center. And on the far left, around the Schnecke Pass, see Prussian cavalry is trying to slow them down along with a little bit of light infantry. But with the French cavalry around, it's been very hard for the Prussians to do much other than snipe and retreat. Let's check in with the situation at the 12 p.m. turn. This is the 2nd timed objective. See, the battle has shifted to the north and the west. The French are pushing pretty hard, have cleared several of the Prussian positions, and are rolling up both the right and the left flank for the Prussians. The general flow from east to west has seen the 4th Corps smash the grenadiers of the Prussian 5th Division, in spite of some pretty aggressive Prussian cavalry responses. Murat's reserve cavalry has arrived, but they were delayed some and haven't really had an effect on the battle other than to convince the Prussians that they should abandon that side of the field. The 6th Corps is advancing to the left of the 4th there, but they really only have a little bit of cavalry and light infantry. But with the Prussians falling back, that's been enough for them to occupy ground. In the center is the 5th Corps, and they've been attacking pretty hard. They've managed to roll up at least 2 of those Prussian defensive lines, and that 3rd Division really is in precarious situation. Both its flanks are threatened to be rolled up, and on the very far western side, the 7th Corps, 1 division, has managed to push through that rough area and emerged just to the south of the Ischerstedt Hasn't been able to take the town yet, but they are making a pretty strong push for it. As for the objectives, the French needed to reach that blue line, and the red X's aren't good for the French. Those are all missed objective hexes. They did not occupy any of the major villages there, the center of the field. One village off to the east that isn't pictured was occupied only because the Prussians weren't defending it. So the French didn't make great progress in the field. Although they pushed the Prussians back, they didn't achieve any of their objectives. As far as losses go, the French continued to inflict quite a few losses on the Prussians. A lot of those losses came in the form of the cavalry regiments that were sparring pretty strongly with the French. But 163 increment losses for the Prussians to just 83 for the French. So there's no question that the Prussian army is suffering pretty heavily. But in terms of victory points, the Prussians get 2 points for every one of those increment losses they inflict. That gives them 166 victory points to 163 for the French. So it's not looking so good for the French. They're actually at a deficit here. And at this point the battle is technically a draw with only a 3 victory point difference. So the French are too slow and taking too many casualties. Not a good combination. Going in for a closer look on the eastern side of the map, around Altangana, see the French are closing in, but the 2 Prussian grenadier battalions are occupying the 2 hexes of the village. The French were unable to take. Over towards Lutzeroda, see the Napoleon with the guard clustered around the village, and the French 5th Corps pushing hard up the center. The Prussian 2nd Division, which had been on the ridgeline there, has opted to retreat, trying to get some cavalry to cover their retreat. While in the center, that 3rd Saxon Division has really been broken up. It's largely in full retreat behind the pursuing 2nd and 3rd Division of the 5th Corps. Here a little further to the west of the 5th Corps, we see they push through the woods there and have emerged on the flank of the Prussians, and that's what really broke up those center defensive lines, their inability to hold the French back coming out of those woods. And on the far western side of Ischerstedt, the polyglot Prussian formations are doing their best to hold. The cavalry has played a big part in keeping them at bay, but Ruckel's first reinforcements haven't quite arrived, so they're very, very thinly spread and in danger of giving up the whole position on the field here. Now we arrive at objective number 3 at the 1340 turn. That's about 6 hours of battle. See how things stand. Down goes Fraser, I think is the way this would be described. This is what a rout looks like. The Prussians are basically in full flight, trying to find some way to stem the tide with their cavalry. Ruckel has arrived in the far northwest corner there, but Hohenlohe is getting smacked pretty hard east and then being forced to the northwest and in danger of being cut off completely from Ruckel. The French advance really hasn't been that dramatic, but they have inflicted a lot of damage on the Prussians. Largely they've been rolling up the Prussian left there around Viersenheiligen and breaking through the center between Ischerstedt and Viersenheiligen. But what about the objectives? They were to have reached Katzschau and Klein-Bromstedt by this turn. As we can see, they didn't get even close. So yet another timed objective missed by the French. But the losses are really mounting. The Prussians in full flight have been subjected to a lot of harrying French cavalry going up the center and around the flanks. So the Prussian losses now stand at 264 increments. Pretty staggering. The French are, though, pretty high themselves with 106. But in terms of the victory points, the Prussians stand at 212. The French actually have 266 because they have pushed 2 Prussian divisions to morale level 2. So that's a pretty big spread. It went from a draw to a decisive victory in the last basically 2 hours. To rescue the situation, the Prussians would need to inflict 25 casualties, maybe 30, while absorbing very few of their own. Seems pretty unlikely at this point. So this is probably a good stopping place. Decisive victory, army on the run. This looks fairly historical. Take a closer look towards the center here, and on the right. Viersaint-Heiligen actually hasn't been captured. French didn't get anyone in, but they did chase the bulk of the Prussian army, the 2nd Division there, away. Towards the center, the 5th Corps and the 6th Corps. It's been all the 5th Corps, really. 6 have deployed. They form square in front of that Prussian cavalry that's screening the retreat. But otherwise, it's been the 5th Corps breaking the lines and advancing steadily northwest. And for the first time in a long time, the 5th Corps has actually formed a line, trying to maintain some flank protection with that massive Prussian cavalry that's formed in front of them. And finally, on the far northwest side, the French have gotten into Ischerstedt, effectively occupying the town, but they didn't get close to Kaschau yet. The advance guard, light troops of Ruckel's force, has arrived and kept them out of it, especially that cavalry. Kept the French moving slowly. They didn't have much cavalry to support themselves. So historical Jena is a pretty difficult fight for the Prussians. It's difficult for the French in the sense that those timed objectives are hard to achieve, but even without achieving them, the victory points awarded for losses is really more than enough to achieve that decisive victory that they did historically. Now, given the preponderance of victory points awarded for losses, it seems like maybe the timed objective points really aren't that valuable, and a smarter Prussian strategy is to pull back, consolidate, and try to defend in depth, inflicting casualties on the French without having to try to retreat at the same time. So maybe those early turns in the fog should be spent pulling away from those frontline positions and forcing the French to engage a more prepared position. And the difficulty is there just aren't any flanks for the Prussians to anchor themselves on, and they're just too small to spread out over that full field. So there might be different options to try in terms of fighting historical Jena, but I think the outcome is so predetermined, it doesn't necessarily have the greatest fun factor. Maybe that'll be found with the alternate Jena, the super Jena, that they envision as an encounter between all of the armies.